Almighty God, we are meeting today to conduct matters of business. Please guide our hearts and minds in the spirit of fairness, right thought and speech. Impart your supreme wisdom upon our activities so that our affairs may reach a successful conclusion. Thank you for being our source of guidance today to the advancement and true welfare of our people and of Australia. Amen. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to elders past and present. The Armidale Region community pays tribute to their love of land, love of people and love of culture. We all share the beauty of this land, the richness of its soil and the uniqueness of its wildlife. Let us walk together in the footsteps of love and understanding. While valuing diversity, let us share the same hope for a better future. Now this meeting has been audio and video recorded, and the recordings of the non-confidential parts of the meeting will be made available on the internet. No other persons are permitted to record the meeting unless specifically authorised to do so by council. I'd ask all mobile phones to be either switched off or put on silent, please. Thank you. Yep. So thank you, councillors. Apologies. Any declaration or disclosure of interest, please? And there is no people registered to have your say. So item 6, confirmation minutes. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Witters, Councillor Muriat. Are there any errors with the minutes? Corrections? Okay, I'll put that. Those in favour? Carried. There's no mayoral minute. So moving on to 8.1, which is for decision, which is, let me get to it. That council receive a briefing on the draft 30-year infrastructure plan for water and wastewater, which begins a program to significantly enhance the water storage capacity of Armidale region. Can I have a mover in a second, please? Councillor Bailey. Councillor Murat. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this resolution is to ensure that Armidale region maintains its market leading edge with a strong water supply both now and in the future. I'm not only talking about possible extensions to Malpas Dam, but also what can we do to better harness Puddle Dock, what we can also do in terms of the challenges we might face with things like the water treatment plant and sewage. So what I'm trying to do is get it on the agenda, and I think there is money available federally, and if we want the horticultural industry to expand, we've got to ensure that we can provide them with a water supply for not only now, but as this water supply has done for the next 50 years. So I'm advocating that we begin the process and get a briefing from the staff in the water area and the business unit, and then move forward to putting forward a plan on how we can move forward to ensure that Malpas does get doubled and does get increased, and we apply for some government funding. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Moran.
I'd just like to endorse Councillor Bailey's comments. This is something that I have been pushing for the last probably 5 or 6 years. I think it has great merit in securing our future water supply, but the financial implications for Armidale region to attract intensive agricultural businesses is important. The jobs growth will, solidify our position in this region as a major agricultural producer.
A speaker for the motion? Against the motion? Councillor O'Connor, you wish to speak for? Okay, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I would like to support this. I think it's a matter of great significance that we actually watch our water carefully. I notice and note that most of the surrounding tablelands councils are on some level of water restriction as we speak, and I think it's one of the matters that we've often discussed perhaps informally rather than formally is the raising of the dam wall at Malpas. So I would just like to support this. I think we do need to get onto it quickly, and water security for this region is something we now have to take a fresh look at, given climate emergencies around the nation. Thank you.
Councillor Colley, your mic, please. So, is Speaker against the motion? Otherwise, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Sorry, we do have items 9.1 and 9.2, which was requested we go into open council. So could I have a move and a seconder, Councillor Murat and Councillor Robinson, that we move into open council so we can have a debate about, and suspend standing orders, sorry, you knew what I meant. So to move into suspend standing orders so we can have a discussion. So those in favour? Carried. I would like to welcome, to take us through this discussion, because we don't have our learned colleague Peter Wilson. I've asked Megan Hawley to come up and provide advice to you as you go through this discussion. So Megan, please welcome, and we appreciate you coming up to provide guidance on this. So I guess let's do one at a time. We've got the code of conduct to go through. So Councillor Tyler, you are the one that raised this, that you want a number of discussions on it. So would you like to lead the discussion, please? Councillor Tyler, you're
I think both motions were carried unanimously. I felt that it was appropriate for councillors to go through both documents. I recognise that in relation to the... Where are we? Where's the... I can't see, I'm sorry. My apologies. We recognise that if we deal with the code of conduct first, that's the minimum standard that we would have to adopt. There's a number of components of that code which relate back to the code of meeting practice, and I refer to disorderly conduct, for example, and other things. We'd need some guidance if there were areas in the code of conduct that you would advise us ought to be stronger. I don't know of any offhand, but that linkage between the code of meeting practice and the code of conduct...
Councillor Tyler, if you could just face this way, because your voice seems to fade away with the mic, if you can, please.
Well, I can't talk to the good person. Drag the mic a bit closer. Thank you. That's a great idea. Yeah. I won't say what I was thinking. So perhaps we might just lead off with that, and I could go to the specific locations in the code of conduct, not so much the procedures for the administration document, but are there, in your view, I'd almost suggest that there's some duplication across the documents in relation to, for example, I want to say to my colleagues that the focus today ought to be predominantly on the code of meeting practice, where there's many red sections that this morning, thanks to Councillor O'Connor, we had nearly 3 hours going through them, and we've got comments to make and some suggestions to make in places. So, did you get my drift?
Councillor Tyler, you're...
Thank you, Councillor Tiley. Look, I understand that your question is regarding whether there is anything that I would recommend that you strengthen. Just to give you some context about how the model code and the code of meeting practice work, and what's required of council. So the Act was amended, the Local Government Act was amended, and the regulations were amended on the 14th of December last year to prescribe the new model codes. You must adopt the model codes. You have effectively a year to adopt the code of meeting practice. There's no such time frame for the model code, but we have a date of 14th of June, at which time, if you haven't adopted either of the model codes or adopted your own code that incorporates the provisions of the model code, then your existing code will cease to be effective to the extent of inconsistency. So whilst there's no absolute drop-dead date or requirement to have both codes adopted by the 14th of June, if you don't, you will have a situation where you're operating under two different schemes. So I think for certainty and clarity around your codes and how you conduct your meetings and the principles that apply to your conduct, it is highly advisable to have adopted codes that are consistent with these codes by the 14th of June. In terms of the model code of conduct specifically, you can supplement it, as you've noted. You can supplement it provided that there's no inconsistency, and there is a deeming provision to say that if what you're doing imposes a more strict standard than what's in the code of conduct, then you're not inconsistent. So generally, inconsistency can be taken to mean, I mean, the courts talk about it in many different ways, but if you can comply with both provisions, it's normally consistent. If you can't comply with both, it'll be inconsistent. So that's why you can actually add a more onerous provision into the model code of conduct if you think that is necessary. Now, I have to say that as a lawyer, I don't necessarily think it's my role to say, I think this should be stronger, I think this should be stronger. The model code of conduct builds on experiences, I suppose, with the previously adopted model code and amends them and supplements them. And I understand you've had some training from Dr. Taylor, my colleague, on what the changes are. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily any particular provisions that need to be strengthened. I think it's a reasonably strong code. But of course, that doesn't mean that in your particular experience as a counsel, if there are things that you think are particular issues that you do need strengthening, that you cannot adopt a stronger position. And I'm happy, if anyone has particular provisions they would like to supplement, I'm happy to consider what you're proposing to do in light of whether that would cause an issue with inconsistency and therefore be unlawful under the legislation.
Councillors, can we address all the questions through the chair, please? And I'd appreciate it. And Megan, just have to tell you this too, but you've got to turn your mic off after talking so that someone else can operate.
Okay, thank you for
Councillor Tiley?
Thank you for that general observation. I'll go to specifics now. On page 13, there are 4 clauses in relation to obligations in relation to meetings. Page 13 of the Code of Conduct. Are each of those components in that clause covered under the Code of Meeting Practice? There's no gaps that you're aware of?
So, Councillor, if I could just, can we talk about clause numbers just so I make sure we're working off this? Okay, because, sorry, that's a different clause number to what was on page 13 of mine. So you're talking about obligations in relation to meetings.
And as you know, there's several of those clearly articulated in the Code of Meeting Practice as well. So I just want to make sure there's no inconsistency.
I don't think there's any inconsistency because my understanding, and I haven't gone through and put the provisions next to each other, but my understanding is that the way that the Code of Meeting Practice deals with the Code of Conduct is that it has general provisions saying that you must conduct yourself in accordance with the Code of Conduct at certain parts of the Code of Meeting Practice. So the Code of Meeting Practice, for example, wouldn't necessarily talk about bullying behaviour as 3.2 does in any specific detail, but when it talks about the ability of the chair of a meeting to rule things out of order or to say that something constitutes an act of disorder because it's misconduct, then that has a linkage back to the Code of Conduct and through the Local Government Act, because the Local Government Act defines misconduct, for example, as a breach of the Act and regulations and also a breach of the Code. So, for example, if you were breaching any of those provisions, 3.19 onwards, that would be misconduct, and that would link into the powers under the Code of Meeting Practice to deal with any motion, for example, that should be ruled out of order.
So if we're in a meeting situation and there's misconduct, you would go to the Code of Conduct to effect the appropriate reprimand?
You would go. There's sort of two different aspects to it, I suppose. if someone is putting a motion or trying to put a question to a meeting and the doing of that involves some breach of the code of conduct, then there are the mechanisms under the code of meeting practice to rule motions out of order or not put material on an agenda, or to pull up a person on an act of disorder. Then that is separate to the code of conduct and the procedures under the code which deal with, well, the procedures particularly deal with a complaint, which you can't make in the context of a council meeting, so that then goes outside. So the code of conduct tells you how you should act in a meeting. The code of meeting practice then tells you what the chair of the meeting can do in terms of anything that is obviously at the time a breach of the code, and that has consequences in terms of the procedures at the meeting. But then if there is a breach of the code of conduct and there are to be sanctions as opposed to just meeting procedural issues at the meeting, then that goes back through the procedures that are aligned with the code of conduct.
In relation to the matter of access to information, specifically by councillors from staff, the code of conduct from page 37 onwards deals with that. Clause numbers, we're talking 8.1 onwards, right through to refusal of access to information, 8.8. I think it's fair to say that from time to time, my colleagues and I feel that we probably don't receive sufficient access, but that's debatable. Are these clauses, they're not replicated in the code of meeting practice, are they? It's a different issue altogether.
No, they're not.
Right. So if we were to try and strengthen these clauses, if there was a view that we need access to more information, how would we go about that?
You would have to draft supplemental provisions. But all I would say regarding that, again, I'm not here to say what you should and shouldn't do if you want to have greater access. I would just caution that in respect of access to information, there is also common law provisions regarding what type of information councillors can have access to and should be given access to. So any supplemental provisions would need to be considered in the context of that common law and in the context of information that is needed for the conduct of business before the council.
Not from the council, but I feel that that's one area where we ought to have some focus on improving the flow of information. So we'd have to draft something that would be stronger than this. It puts the onus on the council laws, which is a bit difficult.
Yes, if you wanted to have more access, you would have to draft something to go in here, or alternatively, you could have a separate policy of the council about access to information. And I think most councils, and I think you have a policy about access to information. So that could be another way. If you didn't want to put it in the code, you can put it in a policy. You may have a little bit more flexibility if you put it in a policy in terms of the drafting. But to the even though there's no specific provision that says that a separate policy can't be inconsistent with the code, you obviously wouldn't want to adopt a separate policy that's inconsistent with the code, because you do need to comply, and it's one of the first standard general conduct provisions of the code is that you should comply with policies of the council. So again, you need to make sure that if there's one set of criteria for access to information in the policy and another in the code of conduct, that both can be complied with and there's not an inconsistency.
Councillor Widders. Question just around your supplementary actions and everything else. If as a council we wanted to put in extras on this document with a supplementary, would we need, with what we want to put in, would it need legal clarification first?
That's a matter for council. I would feel very uncomfortable standing here and saying, yes, you absolutely must get legal advice, but you would need to be cautious that it was not inconsistent, because if it was inconsistent, it would be of no effect. So you would want to carefully consider it, possibly with legal advice from whomever you would seek that from, to ensure that it's not inconsistent with the provisions.
Any other questions to Megan? Councillor Brian?
I'm flattered to be called Councillor Robinson, that's okay. I've noticed other councils have kind of got, rather than just a list of what they shouldn't do, have got the code of conduct embedded in a list of sort of principles that give guidance to the councillors about what their role is as councillors. So it helps sort of flesh out our understanding of why we do certain things. For example, they might have something, you know, like impartiality, accountability, and accountability, for example, about, you know, what the role is there and why we have to follow particular principles. And I'm just wondering if, for example, ours seems to be a bit bare bones around that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that it is a really great guidance for councillors, us, and in the future, to kind of have a sense of what our role is, what our obligations are, what, you know, in a broader principled framework than just a list of do's and don'ts. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
Again, I preface my comments, Councillor, that it's really a matter for council. We act from maybe 35 or 40 councils around the state. I've not seen many that have a broad-ranging statement of principles at the start. I think generally there's roles and responsibilities and those sort of guiding principles now in the Local Government Act itself, which does talk about the roles of councillors and what the guiding principles are for councillors in performing those roles. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't legally, if you wanted to supplement the code, have a set of overriding principles, as long as they were the types of principles that were consistent with the types of issues that the code is attempting to deal with. And there is a bit of a summary at the start of the code about what it's trying to achieve. So it would need to, again, be consistent with the objectives of the code and the particular provisions of the code. But I have not seen that as a common approach of councils to put in that overarching policy in the code of conduct itself.
Any other questions on the code of conduct? Okay, if not, would you mind we go into the code of meeting practice, because that obviously is going to be another one that we need to so I thought I'd deal with both of these in when we got suspended standing order. So anyone that's got a question to Megan about the code of meeting practice, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Councillor Tiley.
if I could just lead off, in the attachments to today's business paper, and they were in the last ones too, there's, in relation to the code of meeting practice, there's shaded areas. Now, those shaded areas are the non-obligatory areas. In my print copy, they're in red. Now, this morning, Councillor O'Connor and I went through. I had the red, and she had the grey areas, and they're different because the staff have taken some decisions to put things in and leave other things out. And that's what I want to go through today, whether we as an elected body are happy with what the staff have put in, or are we wanting more of the red to go in? And that's what we did this morning for 2.5 hours. And Margaret made a heap of notes, which she's got there, but I know it's a bit laborious, but this is not just for us as an elected body. The code will apply, what you would assume, be adopted by an incoming council September next year. So it's an important document in many ways. So this might take a little bit longer than the last one. And
Councillor Tiley, we did go through this with Peter Wilson at a workshop last year sometime, if I remember. So if you just recall back to that.
That was before this was adopted. Okay?
No, we haven't adopted this. So.
No, this is before the government. The Office of Local Government adopted this last November. You had the workshop. And there's been substantial changes, or a number of changes to this, since what you learnt from Peter Wilson some months ago. Anyway.
As far as I'm being advised here, that's incorrect.
Okay. Well, this was published in late November. And anyway.
I think the workshop, by the sound of it, was in January or December.
We agreed last month to have this. Okay? Okay. How are we going to kick off? The first one is the numbering here is a little bit different to on the screen. Jessica. 3.9, 3.10, the giving of notice of business to be 3.9 or 3.10 it might be. In electronic terms it's 3.9, print it's 3.10. And I should say that that happens right throughout the document. The numbering system is not accurate. Okay?
Not always exactly parallel to the draft model code. But I think in relation to 3.9, it is the same, Councillor.
Well, it's still the same on the website of OLG. Anyway, let's go to the first point under giving of notice of business to be considered by council meetings. At the present time, it's noon on the Monday before, the week before.
If we're going to have a chat about it, can we all be on the same, using the same one? Because if you've got that one and we've got... Yeah, because if that's an older one and we've got one that's been prepared afterwards, and we're running off two different...
It's the same.
No, that's the current one that we're operating under. This is what these two drafts are what we're trying to adopt.
So what
is the...
To clarify, the one that we've got electronically seems to be different to the one Councillor Tyler's running, reading off. So if we're not all reading off the same one, we're not all making decisions based off the same thing.
No, you're wrong to blazes. What's in the attachments has grey areas, shaded grey, which are from the red, okay? But not all the red has gone across to the grey, okay? The staff have elected to put some in and not other stuff.
So right? Can we all get a copy of the one with the red, so that we're all looking at the same one you're looking at?
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's what we did this morning.
We just have to work on the grey.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Well, if we're all working on the grey, then shouldn't we be making decisions off the grey, not the one with the red, though?
We're just discussing the red.
Some of the red represents stuff that the staff haven't put in the grey. Do we want it in, some of those things, or don't we? Okay.
I just might ask our CEO just to clarify this.
Here we go.
You will appreciate this was prepared by Peter Wilson prior to his retirement, and was actually considered at the February, or was to have been considered at the February meeting, which was then deferred to this meeting. My understanding, which is confirmed by Natalie, who was Peter's manager, is that what has been placed in the document and shaded, whether it's grey or red, those shaded ones are those items which in the Code of Meeting Practice, the draft Code of Meeting Practice, are discretionary as opposed to mandatory.
That's the whole intent of this. How much of that discretionary stuff do we want to put in to the Code of Meeting Practice? Okay?
And
not all the red has got over into the draft that's in the attachments, and there's quite a lot of it that hasn't got in, which we want to go to. I'm sorry. This morning, Councillor O'Connor had the grey and I had the red, and we went through it. It took 2.5 hours.
I perhaps articulate it. So what we did, we're in this position where the government has now promulgated a mandatory draft Code of Meeting Practice, and what that draft has got black lettering, which is mandatory, and we have no choice about. That goes over and we can't argue about it, but there's a lot, if Councillor Tiley will hold up his document, in the Office of Local Government's document, there's a lot of discretionary material that's printed red. So, and that goes right through. So what's happened is that our officers have, if you like, selected some of the red to come across into our Armidale Regional Council's Code of Conduct, which is in our, Code of Meeting Practice, which is in our attachments. However, what Councillor Tiley and I did this morning was go through piece by piece to identify where there was just differences between what the Office of Local Government's copy that's marked up in red and what we've got marked up in grey. Does that make sense? And so what we proposed to do was just work through that so that everybody here can actually decide if they're happy with the attachment, which is going to be our final draft code of meeting practice, or if we want to amend that slightly, because there are some variations. And one of the unfortunate things, but it's probably necessary to make our document look neat, is that there's different numeration just by one item here and there throughout the Office of Local Government's document and the document that's been presented to us here. But I've actually made a note of the variations, so it should be relatively easy to follow and discuss as we go along. And that's why I've allocated, as I understand it, some substantial additional time so that we can go through that process. Does that make sense?
Councillor O'Connor. Councillor Gray?
I understand where Councillor Tiley and Councillor O'Connor are coming from, in that if there is discrepancies between the two versions, it may be a worthwhile exercise to look at that. As not all of us have both copies, I think it's a mute exercise to do right here and now. One other thing that comes to mind, though, is that I'm pretty sure that all councillors were asked to send through feedback on this meeting code about the items that were in red. There was a deadline, I can't remember when that was. So through the chair, if the CEO could inform us as to whether there were submissions from councillors around or feedback from councillors around the meeting code, because that's going to influence these grey areas.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. And yes, there were a number. I personally submitted one, so I might just get our CEO to comment.
Thank you, Dr. Mayor. Yes, there was feedback from various councillors, and actually the report highlights those items that have been incorporated into the draft code of meeting practice that has come before this council, which incorporates the feedback that has been received from councillors, and they are the shaded grey.
Now, are there any questions to Megan?
Can I suggest, I think we've got to go right through just clause by clause. I don't think we've got any other choice. It's going to take time, but that's why we set the meeting at 2 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock. So I think we just go through clause by clause.
With all due respect, if it's taken Councillor Tyler and Councillor O'Connor 2.5 hours to do this morning, that's a significant chunk of time for this this council, this meeting, to be doing that. And is that an exercise that's better done outside of this council meeting?
With respect to Councillor Gray, Mr Mayor, we decided last meeting to do this process today, and we're ready to go. And I think it can be done fairly quickly, just by outlining the particular sections, and you do a straw poll on each. We're in favour, we're against, and I think we can manage it.
I think we can. Let's just see if we can just look at, say, or rather than going through item by item, there has to be, if two people have identified there's issues, everyone else has read this, so if there's something you want to raise, identify that, and then we'll have a discussion on it. So, Councillor Tiley?
Yeah, red's the operative word, Mr Mayor. We can't look at black.
I can't look at red because I've got grey and black. So sorry, you're going to have to go to your grey one.
All right, let's go back to where we were a few minutes ago. 310, giving notice of business by a councillor. At the present time, can the staff tell me exactly what the closing time is? Is it 10 a.m. or noon? 10 a.m. on the Monday, 10 days before the meeting. 7.
At the moment, that's our current, but this proposes a change.
Yes. This proposal would take it out.
Would make it more stricter in that it would go from 10 a.m. 7 working days prior to 12 noon 10 working days prior.
Okay, so the simple question is, do you want 7 or 10 days? You might put that to us.
No, it's down there as 10 days. So do you want to just put a hands up for those who? To me, it's pretty straightforward. 10 days gives the staff time to work on these notices of motion to determine any financial implications. So, okay, I'll put it. Those people who want to retain it as it's written, 3.9.
Straight away. I thought that was the purpose of suspending orders.
Okay, well, I'm personally quite happy with the way it is. So I'd love to hear some other stories where Councillor O'Connor.
Oh, well, with great respect, I'm reasonably comfortable with the 7 days. I think 10 days is a little onerous on councillors because we want to have the notices of motion to some extent to be current with what's going on in business. It's already quite onerous at 7 days. So I would favour the status quo as you, Mr Mayor, have indicated.
Anyone else wish to speak for 10 or 7?
I'd also like to point out that there is provision already in the meeting code for the Chief Executive Officer to defer consideration of any matter pending the preparation of report, so that questions on notice can be deferred if necessary. So if the CEO needs to prepare a report and there isn't enough time in the 7 working days, then they can be delayed to the next meeting. But as other council have said, that means that the issue isn't current, and if at all possible, given that we only meet once a month, and some of these items are really, really important, that whenever possible, notice of the motion should actually be included on the agenda to which they were submitted.
No, any other? Oh, Councillor O'Brien.
For most motions, you may not need a report, so it seems fairly onerous to have a wider or a longer period when for most you won't need it. So, yeah, so I basically agree with what they were saying.
Well, that's but one councillor wanted to have a talk about it. So, even though, can I just have a straw poll? Those people who want to have it as it's written down, which is 10 working business days before the meeting, please. Those people who want it 7 days. So 7 days. By noon. So we're just changing the 10 to 7. Correct.
Moving right along. You mind if I sort of do what I'm doing? Okay. The pre-briefing meeting sessions is the next red section at 3.32, and it currently reads, prior to each ordinary meeting of the council, the General Manager may arrange a pre-meeting briefing session to brief councillors on business to be considered at the meeting. And it goes on another sentence. We're proposing, we suggest that ought to be changed to, prior to each ordinary meeting of the council, the General Manager will arrange, if requested by councillors, a pre-meeting briefing session. So we have it if at least some councillors want it. That takes away the may, and it puts a little bit more with the councillors to request it if we need it. Yep. That's all.
Just to help Ian, sorry, Councillor Foley, it's 3.31.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, yeah. Keep reminding me all the time of that, won't you? Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. It's just a little bit more power to the councillors to bring on a briefing session if we request it.
Councillor, comment? Okay, I've got a straw poll, please. Those people who want to change it from may to basically will.
At the request of councillors.
Yep. Have you got that wording?
Can we just clarify before we go to that? How many councillors? Does that mean 2 councillors that ask for more information than everybody's got to be briefed? Surely we have briefing with situation where, we get to, otherwise time.
So,
Can we make
Councillor,
it 5 councillors?
why don't we just say a quorum?
Yeah.
Then it's consistent. A quorum is what.
Quorum, yep, I'm happy with the quorum.
So, prior to each, this is just to try and get the wording right. Prior to each ordinary meeting of council, the general manager will, if, what was the other wording? A quorum.
Yep.
Okay, straw poll, please. Councillor Taylor, Bailey, your mic, please. Yeah. Those in favour of that change? That's pretty straightforward. Thank you. And Jess, you got all the wording?
If we go to item 3, the next one is 3.32. We just thought that there's no reason for the public to be precluded from that meeting. In fact, the whole purpose of it might be to enhance, well, the whole purpose of this is to enhance transparency and inclusivity, and it's part of, or it flows onto a public meeting anyway, because it's a pre-briefing session. So the suggestion there is that we delete 3.32.
The clause presently reads, pre-meeting briefing sessions are to be held in the absence of the public. So we're suggesting that be deleted. Clearly, if we're in a briefing session and we're going to talk about something that might be in the closed agenda, we'd have to remove the public. But this is another step in improving the transparency of this council. That's why we want it deleted. I always get the dicky chair.
That's incorrect. I've got one too. Don't worry. Councillor Witters. Councillor Tyler, your mic, please.
All sorted. Pre-meeting briefing sessions, are they also known as workshops? Or are they a different thing altogether? So are they going to happen like half an hour before the council meeting, or are they going to happen on a different day where we all line up here again and the community can come in? What's the set agenda there?
Clarify understanding of the intent of the changes, that prior to a council meeting, if requested, I will arrange, or if requested by a quorum of the councillors, I will arrange a pre-briefing to councillors on the business papers of the forthcoming council meeting. If the public are to be invited, then we would need to then publicly notify the public of the briefing to take place, which means then our time frames will be significantly extended in order for that to happen, just so that you're clear about that.
Mayor, if I might also just make a comment, there's no provision in respect to these pre-meeting briefings about business that's to be conducted in closed or open session, and no distinction made there. So my concern with it being open to the public is that it would mean that you couldn't have any pre-briefing session that dealt with anything that was going to be dealt with in closed session. So I think there's a little bit of an administrative difficulty there. My understanding is the sessions are meant to be more in the nature of a workshop to enable free and liberal discussion without the presence of the public.
It's about being briefed on at least some of the agenda items on the business paper. But we can manage, surely, if there's a matter which needs to be talked about in confidence, surely we can manage that. But surely we also should be aiming at improving the transparency of this council.
Councillor Gray?
I believe that these briefing sessions, these pre-meeting briefing sessions, are important for councillors to be able to go through the business papers, have the briefing without the pressure of necessarily having any public there. We can ask questions or have asked for specific clarification, knowing that it can be asked without going further to social media or any other place, and I think that that's important that we as councillors have that opportunity.
Councillor O'Brien.
There are many councils who have open briefings. It's not an unusual thing. It is about transparency, and there are occasions when we would want confidentiality, but there are times when there would be no reason why other people, especially people who want to be further briefed and who want to have information about the particular issue. I think it's a really positive step for transparency, and it happens in other places.
Councillor Bailey.
No, it's me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm all for transparency. I think the community, we're here to represent the community, so they need to know what we're doing. But I'm also conscious of the fact that the community voted us to make the decisions for them. And we do that at a council meeting, and we make those decisions based on the information that we get in these sorts of things. Now, if you're inviting the community to every single thing, then what's the point of having an elected council when anyone can just turn up and make decisions on their own? How do I put it? Just a little bit. Sometimes, as was mentioned, you need to ask certain questions, and you don't need the pressures of making sure you haven't said the wrong thing or anything else. We're in a closed session like that. You can sort of ask you can have a bit more robust discussion as we do within our workshops. Does that make sense? Yep. All right. Awesome.
Megan, did you want to say something?
Just in terms of, it's a matter for council, obviously, I'm not advocating for any particular position. Just in terms of transparency, the clause 3.34 in the grey version is the clause that's intended to ensure transparency, because it makes it clear that that the pre-meeting briefing isn't to be used to debate or to make a decision, and that's to be left to the council meeting. I do have a concern about if you're having a briefing session immediately prior to the formal council meeting and you have the public at that meeting, whether there's an argument that it is actually part of the formal meeting. I think there's just a bit of a blurring of lines there. It's not something I've thought about before, not being aware that that was going to be proposed, but it causes me some concern about when the formal council meeting opens, that maybe can be managed.
Councillor O'Brien.
I don't think it was proposed that we had it immediately before a council meeting. I don't think that was the intention of this. Immediately before.
It doesn't say immediate, it says prior to each ordinary meeting. I don't think, it doesn't necessarily say it has to be immediately before. My understanding was that that would be the intention, but certainly the code doesn't say immediately before.
Councillor Bailey was after waiting patiently for ages. So, Councillor Bailey?
I'd make 2 points. We're just adding another cost onto council. If we've got to suddenly start telling the public every time we have a pre-briefing session, that's another cost that we haven't budgeted for. Whether we've got to advertise it in the paper, whether we've got to put it in our newsletters, it becomes another cost that we've got to bear. Secondly, I would see a pre-briefing session as also an opportunity to have a robust discussion. I'm not so sure I'd have a robust discussion on some of the pre-briefing items if I knew that everything was going out to the public. I don't think you'd be as open and frank as you would be. The council is the opportunity where you can involve the public, but I think we are the representatives of the people. I agree with Councillor Widders that we should reflect but listen to the public, but at the same time we're elected to make decisions. We need the information to make decisions, and that's the basis on which I think we've got to move forward. I am concerned, as I said, that we could be in a situation where free and frank discussions would be limited because we'd be concerned the public in the room.
Councillor, I'll go Councillor Connor first. Councillor Gladney.
All right. I'll have a little bit of a dig. Obviously, the parties of the community that would be going to these would be stuff that they are familiar with and are involved with, so they're a bit of an input. This is only out of the blue too, as we're just thinking through it. It's not going to be Joe Blow that's just going to be turning up there. I don't see that it has to be advertised, because it's an issue that or does it have to be advertised? So, but it will be the people that will be attending it, I would believe, will be the people that have got a concern or something to put into it, bring something into the open or something like that.
They couldn't talk at a public briefing.
So they can't talk?
No.
I retract.
We can talk.
I retract my statement.
Councillor O'Connor?
Well, look, these pre-meeting briefing sessions as proposed here don't have to happen. They happen if it's an issue. I mean, I think in these kind of documents, you've got to basically give a bit of credit to everybody to be working together and only doing this when it seems like it's a better way forward in terms of bringing ourselves and the community along. So we're not insisting in accepting this, that we're going to have pre-briefing sessions every time or a whole lot of the time, but the reason I would support deleting 3.32, which is in the absence of to actually allow the public to come along, is because it will increase transparency for those that are interested. And I think that's very important for us to be sending that message to the community. But I take on board what Megan, has said. I'm sorry, I've forgotten Ms. Hurley has said. We could just add or substitute there if the matter is relates to items that should be held in closed session pursuant to section 10A of the Act. I think it's the right section. Then they would be held in the absence of the public. But we close the meeting pursuant to section 10A, something like that. But other than that, we let the public come and listen to the briefing, because I take it that some people view that we're here to make decisions for the rest of the community, but they certainly have a great interest in seeing how we do that. And if they, I think, showing them this generosity is a good move for us.
Councillor Miro?
Mr Mayor, we're doing a lot of arguing over something here we can't physically do. We get the meeting papers on the Thursday or the Friday before a meeting. I believe if you're going to have a meeting and you've got to notify the public, I think it's about a week or something, would it be? So there's not enough time to advertise it. The paper comes out on the Wednesday before the Friday we get the papers. So if a councillor did want to call a meeting for a briefing, there's no time to advertise it, so the whole argument is null and void. We can't do it.
Now, councillors, I'm just conscious of the time sneaking away very rapidly. Can we just go to one question per councillor to try and expedite the whole process? So, because otherwise we'll be here all day. So, and anyone that hasn't raised a question, please. Councillor Robertson.
All I was going to say is that even if we delete that clause, we don't have to include the public. All we're doing is deleting the clause saying that we exclude the public, and that decision can be taken later. And that's probably the quickest way to proceed on this. Okay,
I think everyone's had a fair go on this. Oh, me.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I just say, I think because the Code of Meeting Practice is publicly notified, I think if you delete it, even though it doesn't say they will be held publicly, I think there'll be an expectation that they are held publicly if you exhibit this without that clause in there. So I think it may just be difficult. So I think you would at least need a provision similar to what Councillor O'Connor suggested, that I would suggest maybe saying that it could be at the discretion of the councillors and general manager to close the pre-briefing meetings when considered appropriate, maybe not limiting yourself just to section 10A.
Okay, thank you. Can I get a straw poll then, please? Those in favour of deleting, and then I'm using my numbering, which is 3.32. Those in favour of deleting it, please. 4, 5, 6. Those against deleting it? It's carried. Now, any other points?
sorry, if we go to fours, public forums, if you look at our number...
So, Councillor, just to ensure, the pre-briefing sessions now will be held in public. You're aware of that?
Well, I think that...
No, as soon as you, if you delete it, as Megan indicated, the public will be recognising that, or the under the assumption that this will be in public.
Well, I assume that we would put something in that space, similar to what Megan's last comment was. But it's up to the council to determine whether it's public or private. We just reserve that discretion. Yep. Yeah, you're right, Brad. Yep.
Megan?
That we could redraft 3.32 to say, well, we could do it two ways. We could say pre-meeting briefing sessions will be held publicly where considered appropriate by the quorum of councillors. Can I just say, I'd prefer to use the word majority of councillors rather than quorum, just because the quorum implies you're in a meeting situation. I think if we're just talking about a decision made outside of a meeting, majority, sorry to be pedantic, but...
CEO, do you just want to make a quick comment?
Thank you, Dr. Mayor. I'd like to express some basic, I'm not expressing a view either way. I think there'll be difficulty drafting a comment that, or a clause that requires the discretion of the councillors and the CEO. I would then have difficulty in knowing how many councillors, is there a consensus, is it a majority, who has the final say in the first instance. The second issue I do have is to pick up Councillor Morat's issue, is the preparation of the business papers are such that having to notify the public, the 5 working days public, before a council meeting would make it almost, if not impossible, very, very difficult to hold a pre-briefing on the council papers prior to a council meeting.
If I may, Dr. Mayor, it would be remiss of me not to say this. If these are open, and it's on the lines of what the CEO has mentioned, if these are open to the public and the timelines of notifying the public, as Councillor Morat had said, plus the extra or the extra time that councillors have to put notice of motions in, 7 days, and the staff are supposed to fit all of this in that time, that's an unreasonable ask.
Councillor Robinson?
I'd just like to say that according to Councillor O'Brien, this has worked successfully on other councillors, and this is actually going out on public display anyway. So while it's going on public display, and I think we should probably stick to what we've agreed at the moment, we could all review the situation by looking at what happens in the councils that have adopted this successfully. And if we found any problems there or any other models that we'd like to adopt, when this comes back to council for a final decision, this will be a good time to review it.
I'd like to ask Megan, you've made assumptions that these councils, that it's working efficiently, and therefore I'd query that. So maybe Megan could provide some comments on whether having pre-briefing meetings are successful.
I'm not aware of any public... I haven't advised any councils on public pre-briefing meetings. Pre-meeting briefings, sorry.
With all due respect to Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Robertson's suggestion, unless we have that hard evidence to back that up, I cannot take that on board.
Mr. Mayor, I've done it with 2 previous councils where I was mayor and it worked successfully. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just know other councils are different to Councillor O'Brien's. It's just transparent. For the community, come and listen. It's just simple. Yeah, and instead.
So, Councillor O'Brien.
I'm on a group called Labor Councillors, and this has been discussed in depth with them, and it's done on other councils. I mean, I didn't make it up.
So, councillors, you've already voted to delete 3.32, and we haven't actually got any wording to exclude. So, do we want to go back to deciding whether we want 3.32? Yeah.
Sorry. If we've deleted 3.32, we can't move forward until we put in another provision to say which pre-briefing meetings are to be closed to the public. Because without that clause in there, you have to specifically state, otherwise it'll be assumed by the public, from what I'm gathering from what Megan has said, it'll be assumed by the public that they can turn up to any pre-briefing meeting that they want. So we cannot move forward any further than past 3.32 until either we go back and rescind the vote that we just had and keep that clause in there, or we come up with a new clause to say which ones are open and which ones aren't open.
Thanks, Councillor Withers. I think it's rather than a vote, I'm calling it a straw poll. So,
This decision also impacts on the vote around the 10 or 7 days for notice of motions. It does, because it impacts the time preparation for staff to get the papers together, get it out, get things notified to the public. Of course it does.
Okay, let's. I will put. Does someone want to rescind the previous decision?
Since I mentioned it, I would put it there if
Yep.
That we can maybe have another vote, or if you don't want another vote, come up with a better wording.
How about I just put it to the vote again? Back to deleting 3.32 because no, we're revisiting that as a straw poll, please, because the discussion's just gone round again. So can I have a vote or decision on 3.32? Those people who want to delete it, those people who want to retain it, according to that, been retained, so we don't need to put anything in place. Thank you. Now, on this section, is there any other issues people want to raise? Let's move on. Is there any other points that people want to raise, or is it the rest of the document's good? Well, I'm just. Can you turn your mic on, please, Councillor Connor?
Sorry, guys. So if we go up to 4.2, I just wanted to add the mayor or chairs, I think. So 4.2, insert. Oh, look, I'm sorry. Ben, do you remember what we said there? Mayors and person must first make an application to the council by completing the online form. Yeah, I don't think I've got a problem with that.
Councillor Connor, you are sure you've got the information you're after?
Yeah.
So is it 4.2 or are you looking at something else? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Ian, what's your 4.2? Insert mayors on.
Yeah, it's the red attachments that need to be on the screen. No, I've got them on my computer.
Yeah, Megan? Councillor O'Connor, your mic, please.
I think the issue is that the version issued by the Office of Local Government has a 4.2 that says public forums are to be chaired by the mayor or their nominee, and that hasn't been put into council's version that's highlighted grey.
Isn't that already happening though? Like the public forums is the have your say, which is the 5 minutes before the council, and then that's already the council meeting's already chaired by the mayor anyway. So, or they're not me. Sorry, I agree with you, and I think that's already happening on any public meeting I've been involved in. It's always been a councillor or the mayor that's chaired it. Just on this is the 4 bit is on the have your say, which is the start of the. It's technically called the start at the start of the meeting is the have your say. The public forum at the start of each meeting is called have your say. So, but at 4.1 it says the council will hold a public forum, which is this public forum that we're talking about. So is that why that, I'm asking, is that why the 4.2 was taken out, that it's on the red?
I have no idea what was taken out, but I think it should.
Megan, can you just clarify this, please?
So the Office of Local Government version, and these are not mandatory provisions, so you can put them in and play around with them. The Office of Local Government version says a council may hold a public forum prior to each ordinary meeting. And so because it's prior to the meeting, it has to specify who chairs it. The version that council has with the grey highlighting that was in your papers says the council will hold a public forum at each ordinary meeting. So the difference is that your one is actually part of the formal meeting. So that's probably why I'm assuming the drafter of this document didn't think it necessary to say who was to chair the meeting because it's already part of the meeting, so it would be chaired by the chair of the meeting. So you strictly don't need it. It was necessary in the red version because that was contemplated to not be part of the formal council meeting.
Thank you. So,
Whether we want to restrict a person who wants to do a have your say or be part of a public forum to 2 items, we thought it might be a little bit repressive. There might be times when, I mean, I don't think it'll happen very often, but maybe we should give more latitude there to allow them to speak on 3 items.
anyone wish to speak? Councillor Marty? Councillor O'Connor, your mic, please.
Look, I think 2 is quite enough. I mean, if we need to go to more than 2, you just suspend standing orders. We don't need to change the provision, leave it at 2. And if there's some importance that something comes up, we just suspend standing orders to allow another person to speak.
Yeah, a lot of heads were shaking. Let's move on. Okay, 4.7.
Councillor Ty, just can you really be clear whether we're talking about 4.7? If you can deal with the grey ones, please. Don't. So if you stick to the grey ones, please. The mic, please.
Interest, and on those occasions to have something that artificially restricts it to 2 is basically very restrictive on the community. So we thought in extreme cases you might want to have up to 4 speakers each way or 3, but 2 is very restrictive.
Isn't there a provision later on in the somewhere that the mayor or their representative, their chairperson, can allow extra speakers if they feel that the issue is granted enough to allow extra speakers so that the councillors can have more information from the public? Isn't there a clause in there somewhere?
Megan, have your comments?
I think 4.8 in the grey version says if more than the permitted number of speakers apply to speak for or against, the general manager or delegate can request the speakers to nominate.
We're of the view that perhaps increase the number of speakers. And look, we had none last meeting, we've got none this meeting, but we get a rail trail type meeting. 2 for, 2 against is a bit restricted. That's all that we're saying, and we suggest that 4.8 we take that out completely. And the mayor has, as chair of the meeting, he has discretion.
4.9 on the grey.
Yeah, well, okay. The mayor has discretion, and we want to not restrict the mayor in terms of that discretion. If there's 50 people in the place and there's 4 or 5 want to talk on a topic, let them do it. That's transparency, that's openness. And that's the general trend in my thinking all the way through this document. It's about restoring our transparency to the public. Okay.
Not sure if this relates to it, but 4.9 in the grey one, if more than the permitted number of speakers apply to speak for or against any item of business, the General Manager or their delegate, in consultation with the Mayor or the Mayor's nominated chairperson, increase the number of speakers permitted to speak on an item of business, where they are satisfied that it is necessary to do so to allow the Council to hear a fuller range of views on the relevant item of business.
It's already in there. I think it's covered. Let's move on. Next items. Let's move on.
Mr. Mayor, more capacity to manage this whole issue on its merits. As I said, if you've got the 4.8 sort of restricts you.
And so does 4.7, because the order of speakers will be as per the order of the agenda.
Yeah.
I mean, that just artificially restricts the freedom of the person running the meeting. Sorry. We're suggesting delete 4.7 because it's up to the person running the meeting, which is the Mayor, to decide the order of speakers. I mean, just leave it out so that you're not constrained. And then 4.8, we suggested that we delete that and just manage with 4.9, where it is the Mayor, again, who's running the meeting, who uses his or her discretion as to the permitted number of speakers.
We would delete the words, the General Manager or their delegate may in consultation with, and that becomes a mayoral function to determine the speakers for and against in a particular situation where there's a really contentious issue.
If I can just clarify through Councillor O'Connor, so if we take out 4.7 grey page, we're looking at there's no order of speakers, so that if I call speakers, I don't know I won't have a list of the. So why? I question why not just leave it as it is at the moment, which is those come in.
Is right at the end of the agenda. At the moment, you've got to make that person wait until the last bit to be the last speaker. If you take it out, you're not restricted. You can say, look, Dottie, you're in a wheelchair. You come forward first, have your say, even though your item's the last one. Off you go. You've got to meet your nephew at the railway station. You go. And it just gives you the freedom to do that. If you leave it in, you're stuck having to do, keep her there until the end of be the last speaker because she's got the last item.
Councillor Connor, I think if I saw someone in a wheelchair that was desperate to get outside or something, I would use my discretion to allow them to go first. I see.
But you can if you delete that.
I think this is just going round in circles here.
No, it's not. If you don't delete it, you have no discretion.
Councillor Witters?
For Councillor O'Connor with what she just stated, then without it, and I totally agree with what you just said, is that if it's viable for someone in that situation to speak first, then I think, as stated by the Mayor, that we should allow them to speak first to get them in and out straight away. But then, what happens when there's not someone like that, and then you don't follow the agenda item? So Tommy talks about item 9.1, and then Susie comes in and talks about item 13.3, then we go back to item 8.6, and it's all over the shop. Whereas if you follow at the same time, then we're able to ask questions of the speaker, because somewhere further, hang on, because I'm not finished the question, somewhere further along in the code of meeting practice, councillors are then, once that person's finished have their say, if councillors have any questions around what they've said, based on my readings last night, I'm pretty sure that we can ask questions and clarifications from the speaker. So if we're looking at one item, Councillor Murat wants to ask Tommy about 8.1, gets questions, and then Susie comes on and talks about 13.2, and then Bill comes back and talks about 8.1, then, whereas in that, we've got the order so that things keep the flow. So where does that, like, I understand your point, but whereabouts do we then go from there?
The chair of the meeting, which is your mayor, or his delegate or her delegate, it makes that decision without having to be, they've just got that discretion, that right to make that sensible choice. But if you leave this in, they've got to follow the order of the agenda in the order of speakers. And that's what I want to do, to remove that compulsion. So it's up to the mayor to run the meeting the best way in the circumstances.
No. Now, is it easier for the mayor, and I'm only just asking this question because I appreciate your point here, is it easier for the mayor to use their discretion to say, okay, here's Dottie in a wheelchair, needs to speak first, then, and then that's it, knowing that you've got that provision there to keep everything else ordered? Or is it easier for just to leave it willy-nilly and the mayor can just make it up? Like,
just to me, it'd be difficult to manage if with a randomised sort of people coming through. So I'm talking about from a management type of view. Councillor, I'm very conscious that at 4 o'clock we will go out of this suspended standing order. So if we've got a lot of points to raise, I suggest we move along. Otherwise, if there's Councillor O'Connor, if there's people that do not agree with you, you're not going to stay here until they agree with you, surely.
Absolutely not, and I resent that suggestion. This is not the purpose of this exercise.
Good. Let's then, Councillor Robinson.
Can I just suggest a compromise we put in normally, that the order of speakers will normally be as per the order of the agenda items, and that will allow the mayor or ideally council to have discretion over it. At the same time, it is suggesting a recommended order. We need to vote on it.
Is there any other comments coming forward? Or are they all? No. So,
4.9, that it be the mayor who makes that determination, because in the OLG's version it's the general manager. And I
think this is a very important matter, Mr. Mayor. You're our leader, you should make those decisions.
Councillor Tyler, it's already there. That's Councillor Witt has read it out for everyone in case they weren't reading. So it's the provision's already there. So I'm not sure what you're...
With great respect, Mr. Mayor, I think you might be missing the point. The actual grey section as it currently is says that this is a decision of the general manager or the CEO in consultation with the mayor. What we're proposing is that as it is the meeting that the mayor is running, that it be the mayor's determination in consultation with the GM, if you like, but not the other way around. It's trying to strengthen the position of the mayor as the leader of the meeting, as the chair of the meeting.
Megan.
Mr. Mayor, could I just make a point that the decision about the number, the reason it's the general manager in 4.9 is if you go back to 4.2, the applications are made the day before the meeting, and then in 4.5, the general manager may refuse an application to speak. So the process sort of occurs outside of the meeting context, and I think that's why 4.9 currently says the general manager in consultation with the mayor.
And if I might add, councillors, the agenda actually goes out in the Chief Executive Officer's name, which is why this has been expressed in 4.9 as it has. The reality is it will be the mayor that determines whether or not there'll be an increase in the numbers. It's simply a drafting device that recognises who issues the agenda for the council meeting.
Okay, let's move on. Does everyone agree with putting the word normal? Let me finish. The order of speakers will be normally as per. Everyone agree with that? Good.
made a if everybody's got a view, there's been a different view expressed.
I think we'll just put that to the straw poll, and those people who want to include remove the wording of general manager and the delegate and leave it with mayor. Can I get an indication those people want to change it and remove the words? Please show your hands. 2, those people are against. Right, move on.
Okay. 4.10, of our grey thing, this is a very cumbersome procedure, and we thought it would be much more sensible just to delete this and leave it to the general manager's discretion. And we make it, I think it says no more than 2 days. I think it should mean, I think it's meant to say no less than 2 days before the public forum. So this is just about registering material or audio-visual stuff. I think we should...
Megan?
We just thought... do you remember this? The general manager or the delegate may refuse to allow such material to be presented. That seems to be rather sort of onerous with, I mean, unless there are reasons given or something like that.
Be less than 2 days or no more than 2 days, but 4.2 says that an application to speak at the public forum must be received by 12 noon the day before the meeting. But so then if you had to give 2 days notice of your audio-visual requirements, that's sort of inconsistent with when applications close. So that should, whatever the decision is about 4.10, that should be corrected. Yeah, if you've got until 12 noon the day before, then you can't give notice of your audio-visual. Yep. Although I suppose you could argue that, well, if you have audio-visual requirements, you'd need to apply at least 2 days before. But
let's move on.
Public already for us. 4.11 reads, each speaker will be allowed 5 minutes to address the council. This time is to be strictly enforced by the chairperson. The suggestion is each speaker will speak for 5 minutes, but to delete this time is to be strictly enforced and say the council by resolution has discretion to extend the speaker's time. I think we've been in a position here before where we had a person who was not used to public speaking, who was certainly not good at it, and they were cut off before they even got to their first point or their main point. And I think there are some occasions when, and certainly it's what I observed in other places, in other councils, is that if the person's got something to say and they're struggling a bit, the mayor, or actually the council, as a body of 11, should be able to extend the time allocated to them if they want to give them the courtesy of finishing. You know, if it goes slightly over 5 minutes, it's a matter for the council, not that there's 5 minutes and then, you know, the axe comes down and there is no discretion allowed.
Again, I did read this late last night, so maybe I'm putting two different clauses together here, but isn't there a clause somewhere further on down the line where, if necessary, because the speaker didn't, and maybe it wasn't applied in the past, which is fair enough, but there should be a clause from memory that the speaker can be given more time if council believes that there is still important messages to come out of what the speaker's saying. Is there, or did I read that somewhere else?
It's going to be the way it has been recently, which is, you know, whether you're the most eloquent person in the world or the most uneloquent, you've got 5 minutes and then you've got not another word, which I think is harsh on some occasions.
Sorry, I'm pretty sure, again, may have read it wrong, but if a councillor believes that there's more information, they can ask for a motion to be passed so that the speaker gets more time. Is that in there? From looking from the nods, from the yeah. So yeah, although it may not have happened in the past, there is a clause within the. I can't think of what number it is there, but I know it's there. Pretty sure I read it last night.
Is that okay to just say something on this? Is that all right? The 5 minutes is there for a reason. I think in the whole scheme of the speakers, the minority that would need more than 5 minutes, we're probably talking about 2%. So really, are we making a decision here for the majority or for a very, very small minority?
Councillor Robinson?
Yeah, I think the issue was want to leave the 5 minutes in. It was just the requirement to strictly enforce this. And I think that is more of an issue because then we're almost engaging in bullying tactics to shut the speaker up, and it would be far better. Remembering our code of conduct and all our meeting procedures, it'd be far better to give...
Just delete strictly enforced.
Just delete the strictly enforced, and then we at least are following our own codes of conduct, because certainly there's nothing further on that says that that has to change, and you would have to bring in a procedural motion, and that would take more than allowing the speaker another couple of minutes to finish what he had to say. So it's probably the polite and sensible way to do it. And the chairman still has the opportunity to shut them up anyway, if there's any reason to do so. So let's do it the respectful way.
Hang on, just
one quick comment on what Councillor Robinson's point there. If without a strictly enforced time limit, you can have, and I think the parliamentary term for it is to filibuster, you can have an anarchist to come in and talk for 20 minutes if they feel like it. With the provisions on how they're written, you've got the 5 minutes, but then if necessary, again, as to be repeated, we have the ability to then extend their time. And I can understand your point on the fact that it didn't happen. I remember the exact case that it didn't happen, which is fair enough. But there is there is provisions in there. So that's a learning curve, and we can learn from that and move forward.
Let's do a straw poll on this, because otherwise we'll be going here until this evening. Now, the wording, those people who wish to leave 4.11 as is.
Can I ask a question first? Is there further on a clause that says that there can be, that you can override that? Or there's flexibility on that? There is? What is it?
You can handle it with the procedural motion as Councillor Murad indicated.
Then why have we got the strictly enforced business in there then?
Yeah. So let's vote, do a straw poll on 4.11 to leave it as is, please. Those in favour of leaving it as is. Those people who want to change it to remove the strictly enforced? 6. Righto, let's move on. Now, we've removed the strictly enforced. So, councillors, we've got we're up to page, in my page 114, we've got to get up to 100 and, okay. Yeah, we're running out. So, move on, Councillor O'Connor.
Sorry. So item 4.12 in your copy, which is 4.13 in the local government Office of Local Government's version, speakers at forums must not digress from the item on the agenda of the council meeting that they have applied to address the council on. The proposal was that we stop there. If the speaker digresses to irrelevant blah blah matters, the chairperson is to direct the speaker not to do so. If the speaker fails to observe, the speaker will not be further heard. That's just a matter of the discretion of the chair of the meeting anyway, and it's just excess and redundant. So we were hoping to just delete the words "if our speaker digresses," will not be further heard. So basically, just a direction. They stay on the topic. The mayor can then say, "Look, you've got to stay on the topic," and stop at that. It's fairly obvious. Agreed?
Because I've stayed up to read it, so I might as well talk about it. That bit that you want to delete is a guide for the person sitting in the mayor's chair, the chairperson's chair, whatever you want to call it, to let, because they might, if they're inexperienced up there the first time they get in there and someone digresses from their point and then they don't have the discretion to change them, and that's there as a guide for the mayor at the time to keep them on track and to allow the meeting and the speech to go the same way. Because I can get up there, the item could be about spoons, 8.1, the use of spoons within the public thing, and I can say, oh, I don't want to talk about the spoons, I want to talk about using forks at the cinema, and then just ramble on with that for 10 minutes. And if the mayor doesn't have the discretion to do that, or the direction to do that, then it's pointless.
Yeah, Councillor Witters, I agree with you. I think it is good to have that in there for the inexperienced speakers when they come up to have your say. It allows the chair to guide them, and if they fail to take the guidance, I think then you ask them to stop. So again, I'll put, unless someone's got a burning issue on this, I'll put this to the straw poll. Those people want to leave it as is. Right. Councillor O'Connor, you got next point, please.
Which is 4.20 in the red version. We felt that this is once again a matter of the mayor's discretion. It's not necessary. It's redundant. We should just take it out. And the same with 4.20. So it's just a normal part of the chair's responsibilities to manage the meeting. It doesn't need to be spelled out constantly over and over. 4.20 is the same. And so is there any issue with that? Sorry? Well, it's always better to have a shorter document than a longer one, because the more qualifications you have on the chair's power, it is always better in these things to have a shorter document than a longer one, because every time you make it longer, you make it harder to manage, and you take away from the mayor's discretion, sensible discretion.
As a chair, I'd prefer to leave that in because it gives me discretion, and it allows me to warn them, and particularly for inexperienced speakers again, it'd be good to have that ability to guide. Well, so I will put that to the straw poll. People want to leave it as is, please. It's carried. So, Councillor O'Connor, next.
Yeah, look, I don't want this to become a contentious process. I notice the time. I'm well within time, and I'm doing this as a service to this, as we agreed the other day. I really do resent the tone, Mr Mayor, that you're taking, that I'm somehow wasting this meeting's time.
Just Councillor O'Connor, can you just move on this, please?
Thank you. So, in relation to 4.21, that's in direct conflict with 4.5, and we just think it should be deleted.
Anyone wish to speak? That's to, if a person has been refused. This is item
4.21.
Thank you. Yes. 4.21 in the grey. So anyone wish to provide other comments?
4.21 goes to the point that if a person is bad, speaks badly, behaves badly, the general manager or their delegate may refuse further applications for that person to speak at public forums for whatever naughty period they think is appropriate. Well, but that's already provided for in 4.5. I haven't got a 4.5 in. Yeah. Sorry, 4.5, which is the general manager or their delegate may refuse an application to speak at a public forum, and that they have to give reasons for this. And the reason would be, well, you know, would consider your behaviour unseemly or whatever, and that's why we're putting you in the naughty corner for.
Councillor Witters.
Agree. Anyone that misbehaves in a council meeting shouldn't be given a term. But 4.5 and 4.21, is it, Councillor? 2-1, yeah. A little bit related, yeah, a little bit related, but not, so sort of like step clauses there. 4.21, my understanding of just reading it and listening to you is 4.5, the speaker doesn't get a chance to speak at all. Whoever makes that determination says, no, you can't speak. 4.21 has the speaker has been allowed to speak, they've broken the rules, so then the chairperson or the mayor or whoever's decision it is then says, no, right, we've given you your chance, you've broken the rules, you're not getting another chance to speak at a council meeting or to have your say until this allotted time. Is that my reading it again?
Megan, would you comment?
I was just going to say, I don't think it's a duplication. I think it's an instance of where the power can be exercised to exclude a person, and 4.5 is broader to say you have, a broad discretion as to which applications to accept and which to reject. My view about some of these provisions, obviously it's a matter for council, is that, again, this is a public document that people who are going to come and speak to council will see. So some of these provisions manage expectations of what people are going to be allowed to do in the meeting.
So I'll put that to the straw poll. Those people who want to leave 4.21 as is, please. Carry. Righto. Councillor O'Connor?
Which is item 5. These 513 and 514, the discussion that Councillor Tiley and I had this morning was that this meeting of council might consider these to just be unnecessary, and that's my view, that they're unnecessary and that they are just wasting time being there. So it's a matter for the meeting. This is just a sensible,
Just to clarify, Councillor O'Connor, this is 5.13 and 5.14?
That's right. It's just ordinary good management, which we would assume would fall within the discretion of the mayor. If there's a public emergency or something like that and people can't get there, of course the mayor would sensibly cancel that meeting and make other arrangements, and I think we should trust the mayor to be able to do that. And ditto with 5.14. Of course, the item would be moved on to the next meeting where it's possible for everybody to attend, because there is no longer an emergency stopping them from getting there.
Councillor Connor, I think that's basically what Megan was indicating before, is that you're providing guidance to the community of the eventuality. So I prefer to leave it in as is, but that's my view. Councillor Witters?
Question in regards to, again, for Councillor O'Connor and Councillor Tiley, since they spent the morning with this. One of the things there is the safety and welfare of councillors. If in the dire situation that there's a contentious issue that brings about emotion within the public, and as all meetings are open to the public with transparency, should that be left in so that if the fact that there's almost about to be what we like to call around here a blue in the crowd, the safety of the councillors to be able to run the council meeting properly is then put in a jeopardy. So something like that, although it's a 1% chance of happening, it has happened at other councils where people have stormed in and created havoc during council meetings. You can YouTube those. And the doors have had to be locked and a few other different things. So with that provision still in there, it just provides a bit of safety for the councillors and for the community if anything untoward like that happens.
Megan.
Mr Mayor, I think the ability to cancel the meeting because of the safety or welfare of councillors is restricted to natural disasters. So you can cancel if it's apparent that a quorum may not be present, or that the safety and welfare of councillors, council staff and members of the public may be put at risk by attending the meeting because of a natural disaster. So I don't think it covers that other type of scenario.
Councillor Gillettley?
I was going to say something, but it was going to be sarcastic, so I better not. But at the end of this, can we have a little piddle break or something like that? Would that be all right? or
Well,
car park break or something?
Thank you, Councillor. The idea was we'd stop at 4,
Only went, yeah.
and we'd go back into normal submission, but I will have a break in there for council. So I'll put this to
I'll
the
just
straw.
tell me bladder that.
Yep, just to your bladder. You can, Councillor Gillespie, you can, because there's they suspended standing orders, you can just go out to the toilet if need be. So before you do, can I put a straw poll of those people who want to keep 5.13 and 5.14, please? Those people want to keep it as is. Carried. Okay, Councillor Gillespie. Councillor O'Connor?
Which is
Sorry, Councillor O'Connor, I didn't hear you.
flick through now to item 7, so that's a few pages away, and that's modes of address. I don't think there's any problems there, except that properly 7.5, a councillor shall address all remarks or questions either through or to the chairperson. We were just concerned that that really isn't strictly a mode of address item. It's a different matter. It's a procedural matter as to. But look, if people want to leave it in there so that the public know, or councillors who are not used to formal meetings know, that's fine. It's a matter for this meeting, but it's strictly not a mode of address as such.
I might just get, thanks, Brett. I might just ask Megan for comments.
I think the point that Councillor O'Connor was making is that it doesn't necessarily fit under that heading. Is that what you're saying? Because it doesn't deal with how you address people. Look, I don't think necessarily it matters whether it doesn't comply strictly with the heading. And I think there are other provisions about questions going through the chair, but that's all I have to say.
What does that mean? Can you explain? Some of our councillors are not sure what or why you say go through the chair.
It means that the chair can then direct where they go, and I think that's because the chair has various powers under the Code of Meeting Practice to rule questions out of order or motions out of order, etc.
Councillor O'Connor, do you think we need a straw poll on this? No. Okay, next issue.
Hang on, can I just say one? Okay, 7.4, I'd just like to make a comment. Mr. and Mrs., what is this, 1952? What about Ms.? I mean, goodness sake, I'm not a Mrs.
So, Tylee?
Sorry, I'm on the next one. Yeah, that's fair point.
So can we add in provisions of all descriptions? What are they called? What are they called?
Let's move on. Councillor Tylee?
Point taken.
I think this is a matter of importance to women in the room. So Councillor O'Brien's suggesting madam. Ms. Mayor.
So just to clarify, we're going to change the Mr. Mrs. to Ms. Is that it? Or Ms. Mr. and Ms.
Yeah.
All we're doing is putting a Ms. at the end of... Okay.
Yeah, the first 7.1 and 7.2.
So, Councillor Withers?
That's there if the mayor or the deputy mayor isn't running the meeting. Can you have on that provision there that just be called councillor? If Councillor Gillespie is running the meeting, you just go Councillor Gillespie, or instead of Mr. Like you just call them by the, because that provision's there only if it's chairperson or 7.2, where the chairperson is not the mayor, they have to be addressed as either Mr. or Madam, or the chairperson, they have to be addressed as Mr. or Mrs. So, like, as has been demonstrated, no, it doesn't matter. Like, that was just a suggestion.
Okay, a straw poll, those people who want to put a Ms. at the end of... Yep, carried. Okay, Councillor Tylee, I believe it's up to you now. Is there but more?
The declaration.
Sorry, can you turn your mic on and tell me what number?
Can I add an extra one or a question for item 8? For item 8, I just wanted to add a question. We've got 10 and 11 are both reports to council. Do we need both of them?
How are they distinguished?
I think that's simply just take one of those out and renumber them.
It appears to be a duplication, yeah.
The different components of the community strategic plan. Our country, our this, our that. There's 4 different sections, I think.
It needs clarification.
Just had clarification that it's a report to council for clarification and a report to council for decision. So that they are different.
Well, the main thing
And they will be amended. Thank you, Councillor Robinson.
For clarification or for information?
Information.
Information, yeah.
So, Councillor Tyler, you...
I want to take us up to 4 o'clock. Item 1 of 8.1, grey version, which I finally got my iPad working. Declaration of civic role and acknowledgement of country. No mention of prayer.
Sorry, page 122.
Sounds ideal, Councillor Tyler. Sounds ideal.
Well, I certainly made it very clear in the workshop that I would like to see the retention of a shorter prayer, and I've had some discussions with people who are not people of faith. I am a person of faith, and I would personally favour that, and I think I articulated that at the workshop, and that is not reflected in the report, so I'll be having something to say when this item comes up in the next part of the meeting. But I think what Councillor Tyler and I would like to do is throw it open, and one of the arguments is that we just have a short prayer, as that is easy to say for people of any faith.
The declaration of civic role is Peter took those comments from councillors that responded to him, and that's what the response was. That the majority of the responses were not in favour of a civic prayer. They were in favour of a civic role. So, Councillor O'Brien?
Yes, it's not only the multi-faith, multicultural aspect of it. There are people who don't have prayers at all. I mean, I'd love everybody to be singing Solidarity, the Union song too. But that ain't going to happen because, well, Peter Bailey won't be in on it for sure, so even though he can sing. I do think we have to recognise the pluralistic nature of our community. The non-faith aspect of our section of our community is the largest, so it's not just multi-faith, it's those who do not have any allegiances to any religion at all. We all have our beliefs, but we actually can't insist that other people adhere to them. As I said, otherwise I'd be insisting that you do the thing that I think is most important of all, and that is sing the Socialist Solidarity song, and that won't happen.
Viva Revolution, isn't it? Councillors, we have to, if I can just remind you all, you're councillor for the region, so please, and I've heard a few people talk about we're the city of churches. Well, we're not Armidale Council, we're Armidale Regional Council, so we are representing the people from across the region. So in your deliberation, consider that, please.
Thank you, Mayor of Guyra. Could I just remind you that the Armidale recognises, the Armidale Council or the Armidale area still recognises probably 75% of the population, which is the city of churches. I understand the comments that Councillor O'Brien has made. I don't believe it does us any harm to have the civic prayer on a shorter version, as Councillor O'Connor has ably suggested, and I don't think it's going to exactly hurt us, and I'm happy to consult. I went to the Harmony ceremony out at the mosque on Friday with the CEO and and Kim Bryan, and I'm very happy to consult with the Mufti of the mosque to ask them how they feel about a civic prayer, so that we can encompass a wider church, so to speak, and people can feel more comfortable. And I think if we are prepared to do those sorts of things, I see no problem. It's not exactly doing us any damage, and I think it makes good sense. Do a bit of consultation, we come back with a working prayer that the vast majority would feel comfortable with.
To me, again, in regards to the prayer, I believe it's an all for one or all for none situation. As has been mentioned, there's a lot of multi-faith people around, and there's also people of no faith. And to have just one prayer based around one certain faith is, again, unfair. So just coming off the top of my head, you either give every single faith and religion that is within this region, you say a prayer for them at the start of the meeting. It could take you 10 minutes, could take you an hour and a half, depending on how many are here. Or you get a working party together that comes of all of those faiths and religion, and they come up with one single solidarity. We will not be moved. Solidarity prayer that encompasses all religions, or you scrap it and you come up with what has been proposed in the council papers of the, what was it? Affirmation. Because if we're all about transparency and inclusive for the community, that's what needs to be done. You either do it for everyone or you do it for no one.
Councillor Gray?
At the risk of having this drag on for, I might take 5 minutes. No, only kidding. I'm neither here nor there whether the prayer stays or goes, to be very honest with you. The one thing that I think is important to consider is, does religion and politics need to mix together? And in this day and age, the answer is probably no.
So let's have a straw poll on this. Ultimately, this is, do we retain the prayer or do we go for an affirmation? So I'll put that. Do people want a prayer? Do we retain a prayer or do we go for the affirmation that is in the document? So can I...
Hang on just 1 second. That's called a civic prayer that you've got in there, and it doesn't have any religion in it. So if you're going to call it, we've just got to be careful with definitions here. If you're going to call it an affirmation, then that's non-religious. If you're going to call it a civic prayer, but with the one you have, that's not religious. But if it's going to be religious, we just need to be clear about what's what.
Okay, I'm going to ask whether you wish to stay with the with as proposed, which is an affirmation. So that's in the documents. It's an affirmation. So those people who support an affirmation, please hands. Those people against? Right. Councillor Tiley? Any other points, Councillor? Councillor Gillespie?
There's just a quick little point I'd like to bring up to the CEO is the toilet in the men's, the cistern in the men's got a leaky tap, so we're on water restrictions, so we better get the janitor to have a bit of a look, or the maintenance fella, because just the cistern's leaking.
So, councillors, is there any other points to raise in the code of meeting practice?
Which is our numbering system, rules of debate. That's an optional one. We just wanted to change the word must from should and delete the last sentence, which goes onto the other page. So if the motion does not identify a funding source the council must defer consideration pending a report from the general manager on the availability of funds for implementing the motion. We just thought we'll delete that and just say a motion or an amendment to a motion which, if passed, would require the expenditure of funds on works and or services other than already provided for, which, let's face it, would often be the case, should. So already provided for in the council's current adopted operational plan. The next word there is must identify the source of funding. We thought maybe if we substitute the word should, because it is a kind of it's sometimes difficult for councillors to actually know what to identify as the source of funding, but it is information that clearly is relevant and should be a joint exercise between councillors and the staff to discuss how that motion's purpose could be achieved, or whether indeed it's not achievable due to financial matters. But we thought must is rather difficult for councillors to do, but if we should identify, and then if we delete that last sentence, then the possibility exists for there to be some quick, it could be an urgent matter, some quick discussion with the CEO and or staff at the meeting or down the track. It just leaves it open for us to negotiate how we could possibly fund that. It doesn't stop a deferral of the matter, but it certainly doesn't force a deferral.
Yeah. CEO?
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce Councillor O'Connor's words there, that there's always open to any councillor, individually or collectively, to seek advice from myself or the directors in relation to the drafting of any notice of motion. And during that, the course of providing that advice, we would certainly provide advice on potential funding sources for any notices of motion.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that this is for general motions, not just notices of motion. And I think and therefore this might come out of an amendment to as part of the debate for council, and therefore really making it again mandatory rather than say should. We're just leaving ourselves able to be more flexible, and therefore in the end it will create better governance.
Just hold on, Mr. Mayor, can I just say I don't agree, I'm sorry, because there is a risk that a councillor could put up a motion, has not bothered to talk to the staff about where the funding would come from, and therefore we're flying blind. I think it becomes imperative when we are facing such tough financial times that it is up to the council in putting the resolution forward to have talked to one of the three executives to say, you know, I want to paint the park toilets pink and green, and how much is that going to cost? And they come back to you and say it's going to cost 50 grand. You've got to be able to, you know, we've got to show responsibility. It's just a matter of doing some preparation beforehand, talking to the senior staff, then putting the resolution forward, knowing that they've got some idea of where the money's going to, or you're making a recommendation as to where the money's coming from. I don't think we should leave it open.
Councillor Bailey, I'd concur with that.
It's not open. It's saying just exactly what you want. A motion or an amendment to a motion which is passed would require expenditure of funds on works or services other than those already provided in Council's current adopted operational plan. Staff will identify a source or sources of funding for the expenditure that is the subject of the motion. So, well, okay, yep, should's fine, but that means it's incumbent upon any of us to go to the staff before we put that notice of motion up to identify funding. Okay, and I think that's the safeguard you're looking for.
I just don't think should strong enough.
All right, I'm happy with would.
The word start has in your red bit. There's
So can I, rather than trying to remember what people said and what they didn't say, can I put it that a straw poll, those people who are going to retain it as is, please? 6. Okay, any other points? And
In relation to the mayoral minute, so the same problem, but if I'm assuming the community would feel this, or the councillors would feel the same way about that, so I won't press that. But you'll see the mayoral minute 9.10 in our version adopts the same compulsory wording. So where a mayoral minute makes a recommendation that if adopted would require expenditure of funds, it must identify the source of funding for the expenditure, etc. So I'm assuming everybody's going to vote in the same way for that. Is there any distinction want to be made between mayoral minute and a... Okie doke. Yep.
Voting at council meetings, number 11, the 11.11, do we want all voting at council meetings the names of those who vote for and against? We only have it now in planning decisions. We could, if we wanted to, have it declared on each vote who votes for, who votes against. I favour it because it's yet another transparency mechanism. 11.11. That's my definition of impossible with you.
Councillor Tyler, we could always, any councillor can ask for a division and a vote.
They can. I'm just putting it to you. Other councils do this. All voting at council meetings, that's 11.11, must be recorded in the minutes of meetings with the names of councillors who voted for and against each motion or amendment. It's pretty straightforward.
Megan?
Fine, Mr Mayor, that text is in the Read in the Office of Local Government version, so the issue is whether that should go into Council's version. It hasn't been included in Council's version, and the covering report explains why the decision was made, because you can call for a division.
However, there's councillors that live out of town, and unless you're going to make the meetings at 8:30 in the morning, which I'd agree with you to go until they're finished, but if you're going to have meetings starting at 4 o'clock, I personally think that place a risk on the councillors, and I can't agree with that.
Do we have a work health and safety issue when it goes past a certain time as well? No?
The alternative is to start earlier, of course. But how many times have we gone beyond 8 o'clock in the last 18 months? I submit not once.
It still can happen. I remember the Armidale generic ones used to go until the... No, that's it. Okay, any other points? If that's the case, if there's no other points, I'd really like to thank Megan for spending the time with us. I appreciate your input and guidance. There has been food laid out the back, so can I request a mover and a seconder, Councillor Murat, Councillor Witters, that we adjourn for 10 minutes, That the toilets are only... So those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Can I have a move and a seconder that we resume standing? Councillor Murat, Councillor Gray, those in favour? Carried. So item 9.1, the recommendation that parts A and B. So can I have a move and a second? Councillor Murat, Councillor Martin, Councillor Murat. So can we take it as I've covered in
during our discussions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Can I have a second? Do you want to comment? Okay. Okay. I'll put that to vote. Those in favour? Carried. Item 9. You want to do the same with item 9.2? Move in a second, please. Councillor Murat, Councillor Martin. Can I put that to the vote then, please? Those in favour? Carried. Item 9.3, acquisition of land at Gyra. Councillor Bailey, Councillor Murat. Councillor Bailey?
No, Mr. Mayor, that's just an operational matter.
Okay, any people want to speak for it? Councillor Robertson?
All I was going to say is I did look up where this travelling stock route was on the website, and it seems to be cutting a very small one in half anyway, so that there shouldn't really be any objections to it, so it seems to be sensible to allow it to go ahead.
I think, Councillor Tiley, when you're administrator, you were the one that passed that DA, weren't you, if I remember right?
Was, yes.
Yep. So, Tyler, you wish to?
Yes, and I'm trying to find the attachments. You're a bit too quick for me. First of all, one question: do we have an estimate of the what used to be Section 94A levies that we collect in relation to this subdivision, please?
The CEO.
Understanding is this has been collected or was collected during the time of the Gyra Shire, and the quirk of legislative change has necessitated us purchasing this land in order to resolve the Aboriginal land claim matter, which has now been resolved. We will transfer it to the developer.
I'm looking for the attachments. The evidence of approval or withdrawal of the Aboriginal land claim, you're saying that's finalised? That's great. The other thing that I'm looking for in the attachments is the matter of the completion of the ecological surveys by GeoLink. Did it reveal significant ecological issues?
Outstanding matter in relation to that DA.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Carried. Thank you. Oh. Item 11.1, which is public exhibition of the draft green print in 3 sections. So can I have a mover to Councillor Gray, Councillor Widders. Councillor Gray?
Just like to thank the staff in preparing this document, this green print. They've done an excellent job, and it's exciting that it's now actually going out for public exhibition. Thank you.
Councillor Widders?
Concur with Councillor Gray.
A speaker for this motion? A speaker against? Otherwise, I'll put it. Those in favour? Carried. 11.2, on-site wastewater management policy. 2 parts. Can I move it? Councillor Murat, Councillor Gray. Councillor Murat? Councillor Gray? Speaker against? I'll put that to vote. Those in favour? Carried. Item 13.1, which is cash and investment report. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Murat. Councillor Bailey. Councillor Murat.
No comments, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bailey. Okay, speaker against? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Carried. Item 13.2, which is a monthly financial report. Noting...
Mr Mayor, yesterday I sent an email to the CEO and to all councillors asking what action is being taken to reduce the operating deficit to zero.
Can we get it on the table first, please?
Pardon?
Can we get it on the table first,
yeah,
please?
Sure. I'll move the report.
Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Yep.
Councillor Robinson. Councillor Taylor.
So I gave the CEO notice yesterday as to inform us what she's been doing in relation to reducing or preferably eliminating that deficit by the 30th of June.
Councillor Tiley, I appreciated the advance notice. If I can just take as a little bit of your indulgence to take us back to the adopted budget position for 2018-19, which had a consolidated deficit of $3.8 million. Through the following actions, which I've talked about before, we have now a revised deficit position as at 30 June of, and this is a consolidated position, of $438,000. I need to stress that no actions were taken to cut any services. What we did do was continue to rigorously manage our vacancy factors and the staffing resource. We made considerable savings and reduced the budgets for materials and contractors, as well as made savings through improved procurement processes and indeed some of our major contracts. It remains a day-to-day job of all of our budget holders to continue managing expenditure and confining expenditure to essential spend. We've improved our debt recovery percentage, and there's been a significant focus on that, as well as ensuring that our invoicing is timely. Ongoing, and I have to advise the Council that while there's a vast improvement in our budget position from that originally adopted, to eliminate the deficit to zero, Councillor Tiley particularly, I think would be very optimistic, especially since we didn't begin robustly managing the budget deficit until almost at the end of the first financial quarter. However, we're not giving up, and we still have some aspirations to improve that consolidated budget position, deficit position. And so, in order to do that, we have the implementation of paid parking at the airport from the 1st of May. And so we will get 2 full months of paid parking from the airport. We're accelerating some components of the transformation program, such as the process mapping and re-engineering of various processes to gain efficiencies. That may not translate into cashable savings, but it should translate in this financial year, but it should translate into an improved service and greater efficiency. The roads maintenance crews have capitalised on their past performance for RMS and picked up additional work, additional contracts from RMS, which will realise some additional revenue coming into the council between now and the end of June. We've placed a moratorium on any spending between now and the end of the financial year that's not deemed essential, and there has been, I guess, a tightening of the exercise of delegations for spending. And you can see from the cash investment and investments report, we have ensured that our cash is appropriately invested to maximise the interest returns, especially the sweep of our current account to place it in higher interest-bearing accounts. We are installing, and will happen before the end of the financial year, improved parking technology to ensure that we get a higher level of compliance as well as enforcement. We, I guess, reallocated number of our workforce costs to grant-funded capital projects as opposed to coming out of the general fund or indeed any of the other funds that were held. Our improved safety performance has reduced our work cover claims, and we're continuing to rigorously manage the claims, but also the workforce safety, and our insurance premiums are reducing. And and it's relatively small, but I think a fairly vital matter, is that we've automated a phone attendant, so we're not relying so much on the well-done overflow service. And as I said, Councillor Tiley and councillors, while I think a zero or a balanced budget at the end of the financial year is a worthy aspiration, I think it is optimistic, but certainly we would hope that we have a much improved position.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Tiley?
Mr Mayor, firstly, thank you very much for that comprehensive briefing. It's greatly appreciated. It's heartening that you've really got in there and you're turning over the rocks, so to speak. Did I hear you correctly when you said you now think the deficit at the end of the year will be 400 and something thousand? Because the report says 874.
Councillor Tiley, the consolidated position will be 482. We're expecting 482.
Is this the situation? In relation to airport parking, I know it's early days, but I'm wondering what the net collect might be and to what extent that might offset the 500,000 depreciation that we currently incur.
Councillor, you mean the 500,000 operating deficit at the airport? Yeah, I don't know that we have the final net numbers. The paid parking, we are enforcing the parking, the timed parking that's out there at the moment. From the 1st of May, we'll have actually pay parking machines where you actually pay and display a ticket in your window.
What we'd net in the, pardon me, Madam CEO, we might net 200,000 a year from parking. Is that still front of mind, or could we do better than that? Bearing in mind a lot of this comes from outside our ratepayer area.
Which is good. I'm told by the manager of the airport that the 200,000 is an annual expectation. He's generally conservative in his estimates. Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
There is I didn't want today to move a motion that you get the budget to zero at the end, 30th of June, and I'm really heartened by what you've said, and the moratorium component of that, I think that's to be commended as well. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Brien.
Does the change of status of Kempsey Road release any more finances to us?
The CEO?
This change of status of the road has yet to be advised to us. We're still hopeful, but it hasn't actually occurred yet. What has occurred is some $2 million of capital funding is coming in to make improvements, particularly around the Big Hill. That's a capital fund, and it's positive because we don't now, well, over the years, we hopefully will not need to use so much of our operating budget to make the kind of responsive repairs that we've had to in the past.
And Mr Mayor, that's absolutely spot on. Lesser ratepayers funds on Kempsey Road. It's absolutely vital that we make a really strong case to the RMS for maintenance funding for the regional roads allocation in this our first year, because that'll be the yardstick for future years. We do well, we can expect to do reasonably well in the future. So all the arguments that we put together, fixing country roads, you remember, and the 3.3 section of the street bit near Joggler, all of those good arguments and those good people down there that helped us with those submissions, all of that should go into a really cogent submission to RMS right now before the Gazette occurs in July.
Councillor Robertson?
The more we get from that, the less we need from ratepayers' funds. Thank you.
I also had a couple of questions as well as seconding the motion. And one was noting, this might be a question on notice, that the February financial report includes over 3 million to be spent on governance, safety and risk. And I wondered if it's possible to get some details of the major expenditures in these areas. I was also there's a couple of other questions, but if you can answer that one first.
Councillor, I'm happy to take that on notice. I can say that most of it will be on staff salaries.
And the other thing was, we've been talking about capital expenditure for Kempsey Road, but obviously this will still affect our depreciation, because if we completely upgrade a 13 or 14 kilometre section of that road, then clearly we won't need to depreciate it, at least in any significant amount, until it's taken over as a state road, which has now been announced. So I would imagine this will have a favourable impact of maybe several million on our next year's financial budget. And
Councillor Robinson, it has not been gazetted yet, so we can't talk into the future, please.
We presumably can expect it to happen in the next financial year, in other words, in 1920. Because when politicians actually say these things and it gets reported in the paper, I would imagine that it's going to happen, and it should be on our budgets, and it should be something that we should be looking forward to.
Yeah, let's just wait until that happens, then we can move forward.
Yeah. But I think we should also be planning for the future, so I'd like to express the sentiment that the substantial turnarounds that we've heard in our budget will allow us to review our operational and delivery plans so that we can actually achieve the important targets set out in them. And that's probably one of the good news stories of this financial review and the financial report. So thanks very much for that information. It will be very useful.
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Bailey?
Look, congratulations to the CEO. What upsets me is that I sat at a meeting at Tinga 15 months ago, just after we were elected, and I'd moved a motion that we return to a zero budget, and we got absolutely nowhere. And they just, I don't know what happened, but the previous CEO just ignored us. And I think that's very unfortunate, because we would be a lot further advanced if the stringent provisions the present CEO is putting in place have been put in earlier. And I find that very concerning.
Now let's move to the general debate. So Councillor Murat?
I had just one question. It's just very practical. In relation to some of the election promises that were made, is there anything that council has to do now in order to secure those promises?
I think we're a little bit preemptive until we find out who even ministers are to chase us. So let's just, when we do find out who relevant ministers are, we can pursue it.
With respect, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the CEO, I think it's more a question as to administrative procedure rather than any political issue.
Councillor, I'm assuming that the promise that you're talking about relates to what Councillor Tiley raised around the status of Kempsey Road. Our submission to review the status of Kempsey Road back to a state road has already gone to state government with the support of the local communities there. They provided submissions. It is in the process, and I understand that it has been considered by the previous Minister of Roads, of Transport, the Honourable Melinda Pavey, and it is yet to be determined and as the Mayor says, gazetted. Talking in not just that, but in relation to the very specific liquidated amounts that have been mentioned in relation to the Kempsey Road, the 4.6 being part of a 16 million, eventual allocation to that road. I just wondered, and there's no load, there's no sort of insinuation here. I'm just wondering if there's any further administrative matters that council needs to undertake to sort of actually get the check.
If I remember correctly, that there was no promise by our local member about funding for that. it was just going to be put in a pot and decided. So I don't recall any promises. So can we move on from this? Is there...
I've got his media release where he did promise it. Another case in points is the $6.5 billion for the industrial subdivision at the airport. I think it doesn't need to be formal, Madam CEO, but you talk to the local MP. I talked to him on Monday, and his major concern probably is that there's been a lot of grants issued all over the place, and they want acquittal. They want the projects done. So I think you'll find that he'll be onto us to make sure that we spend in a timely fashion, particularly the stuff from 2016-17, the bridges and the like. Thank you.
So, okay, any other... No, let's put that to the vote. Those in favour? Carried. Item 13.3, which is the status report on the Stronger Communities Fund and the Implementation Fund.
Move the recommendation and seek to
Councillor
speak to someone.
Tiley, Councillor Gray, Councillor Tiley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a few questions on this. Overarching comment would be it's really terrific to see 100% in the completion column in the vast majority of projects. So that's excellent. I'm concerned that some grants may be lost at the 30th of June unless we get on with it and spend them. And I'm sure you're around that, Madam CEO, particularly the allocations from the merger fund, the $9 million. I'd like to know, in relation to timber bridges, you're seeking an extension in that particular case. Where are we at with the timber bridges? What projects have been completed? What are in the pipeline? What are being done by contract? Perhaps Mr Piakoski or yourself?
Just address you on those timber bridges.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. So with the bridge program, we are working through a number of bridge items at the moment. There is a combination of our own staff working on bridges and a combination of contractors. So at the moment, whilst a number of bridges works have been done, Hiscox Culvert is one that's being finalised at the moment. They're beginning work on Abington. And they also are working on 2 on Rockvale Road, finishing off on Boundary Creek, and also on Wongabinda Bridge. So it is a combination of staff and contractors. Yes, yes. We're looking at the flood levels and the width of that, and combination of approaches. Okay, there is some cutting of rock that is taking place on Boundary and on Wongabinda as part of the program. Yeah. It was less than that. It was around the 7 being done by contract, and also 2 from our own staff. And the strategy of the 32 bridges still applies, and we're still working through them. So $2.9 million of merger funds was allocated, along with about $550,000 through the additional bridge renewal funding, the feds. And so of that, majority of that, there will be a small portion left over at 30 June. And we have applied for additional funding through the round to complete another 2 bridges, which is our maximum allowed to apply for within that round. 32. It depends on the outcome of the round 4 funding, which will be potentially those two.
Thanks, Leah. Okay, Councillor Merritt.
What about me? I've got questions on 2 items here. One's the Generic Dam Stage 1 of the master plan. It says here that there was $170,000 allocated. We've now spent $83,551, and it's now the project's completed. In the motion that was put forward under the administration by Dr. Tiley, there was $370,000 allocated for the Generic Dam Stage 1 upgrade, and the work to be done was quite specific. It was a toilet block, some work to a car park and something else. And I was advised by Peter Dennis at the Tinga meeting 15 months ago that that money had been put aside and was secure. It now appears to have been reduced to 170, and if you're going to reduce it, at least the initial allocation should be there, indicating that 370,000 was originally passed in a motion by Dr. Tiley. And the other one's the Mall Vibrancy Plan, and from recollection, and I might be wrong, but that motion was also put under administration and passed by Dr. Tiley, and that was to spend $580,000 on the mall, and we've now got a figure of 280. And we've spent 139 and it's now 100% completed. When councils approve a motion for works to proceed, I was under the understanding that it's up to council staff to proceed and complete those projects. When a motion's put, if they have to cut those projects for any particular reason, surely council should be advised of this matter. Can I get a clarification on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. CEO.
Thank you, Councillor Moret. I think Mr. Piakowski can answer the relation to the Demeric Dam, and as far as the More Vibrancy Plan is concerned, it was agreed through the Business Advisory and the Regional Growth Advisory Committee that that would be subsumed into a broader master plan for the whole of the city. And so that money is still yet to be spent and will be allocated towards the master plan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The Demeric Dam, there's been a fair bit of work done in terms of the detailed design on that particular, this is the recreation grounds we're talking about. There is some allocation of funding for that originally, for that project that was allocated to the airport. Well before I started, and that was one of the drawdowns on that particular funding. We've had to reallocate or rescope what we could do with that particular project based on the funding that was remaining. We do have detailed design for that, and we're able to apply for some additional funding moving forward. So I'm not sure, I can't recall exactly what Peter Dennis might have said at that particular meeting about having allocated that funding aside, but I'm happy to take that on notice and check and see exactly what the dollar values are, but my understanding is that the amount that you just quoted is what's available in that particular for that particular project.
So, Councillor Tiley, you had a question?
Yeah, I'll let that one go through to the keeper, I think. Could I ask the nature of the transformation program? It's at page 311 of the attachments. There's 571,000 of the implementation fund tied up there, nearly an eighth of the $5 million, and I wasn't involved in that at all. I'm wondering what it's doing, what it's about. And a similar question further up the page about the implementation of a payroll system, again under the implementation fund, and again for nearly $500,000.
CEO. Councillor Tiley, you're...
Yeah. Through you, Dr. Mayor. Sorry, I don't have the attachment in front of me. You raised the question about the transformation program. Yeah. Yeah, the transformation program is a very comprehensive program that we've briefed the councillors on a number of occasions. They relate to a reasonably wide variety of projects aimed at improving the internal efficiency of the council. They range from everything, as I described in response to your question about the financial reports, to service review, process mapping, process re-engineering, through to using technology to improve the efficiency of what we do. Moving, I guess, a lot of the council processes from the 1950s through to, the 21st century, where technology actually undertakes a lot of the processing that was previously done manually. And I believe, and certainly our CFO is able to provide greater elaboration on the payroll system, but it is, I think, about improving the efficiency of the payroll system that we currently have, which is very manually based, and therefore at each handover runs the risk of errors and mistakes through to a more streamlined, technologically based payroll system. But if Kelly wouldn't mind, she can give you further detail on that.
I'm not going backwards, but in relation to the major merger funding, the total project income is indicated in the attachments at 10.5 million. We've spent less than 4 million, and that money came into our bank account in about August of 2016 and was substantially allocated before the end of that year. I'm really worried that we mustn't lose that money, and it's only a short time until the end of June. Just a moment, please don't interrupt. I thought I object to being interrupted when I'm having a train of thought going. So I'll leave it there.
As conscious of the 30 June deadline as you no doubt are, and have every intention of making the expenditure, as much of the expenditure of that money as possible. There may be one or two items for which we may seek an extension, but there are programs and projects in train to expend that money.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, CEO. Just a point of clarification with the particular line item around the ITC development. So it's a fairly substantial allocation of $483,000 made out of merger funds. The actual underlying program is a substantial program of works. The comment that's in the report that went to the Office of Local Government just merely relates to the fact that that's not quite finalised yet, and the reason for that is one of the last projects that was scheduled to be undertaken under that program, along with a range of things like server upgrades and rollout of software, purchases of new software, over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, is just that we are finalising a merger of the payroll systems for Guyra and Armidale, and that's the reason why that line item isn't quite complete yet, but it's obviously not the whole amount. The actual payroll project is a much smaller component of that allocation. In relation to the transformation program, just to give you an idea as to how that allocation has been established, we had undertaken a review of the merger funds late last year in relation to the $5 million program specifically, looked at all of the programs that were actually finalised at that point or due to be finalised, and we've worked out how much we think is going to be spent on the various line items. What the transformation program is basically a roundup of anything that's unspent at this point in time, and there are also some specific initiatives that have been included into that allocation. A couple that come to mind are things like customer service strategy and the special rate variation and rates harmonisation processes. So out of the transformation program allocation, even though it is a large amount, there'll be an underlying program of specific works associated with that that is currently underway and will continue. We will likely be seeking an extension of time from the Office of Local Government in relation to the transformation program allocation for some funds. We are obviously spending money as we speak, and that will continue until the 30th of June. In relation to the $9 million fund, we have already sought an extension, and we're waiting for advice from the Office of Local Government as to the approval of that on the items that are notated. Where we haven't quite spent the funding allocation, and noting that we have a couple of projects where we'll have to do some further investigation to answer the questions raised today, we'll be seeking advice from the Office of Local Government as to whether any of those unspent funds can be reallocated to other projects already identified. So the $9 million has some quite specific requirements around it as to how we can allocate those funds and treat any unspent funds. The other funds aren't quite as strict, but specifically for that program, that's what we'll be looking to do. So we are actively trying to manage this program as we get towards the end of June. We obviously don't want to be getting to the end of June and having anything unspent at that point in time that hasn't been approved for a rollover. So that's the process we'll be undertaking and is already in train.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, no other questions. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Carried. For information, 13.4, Gora Preschool and Long Day Care Centre. Councillor Robinson, Councillor Martin. Councillor Robinson.
My right of reply.
Councillor Martin.
Thanks. I just wanted to say congratulations to Amanda and all involved for their hard work and commitment to achieving the outcome that they did.
Speaker for? Speaker against? I'll put that. Those in favour? Carry. (16.1) The Minutes of Traffic Advisory Committee. Councillor Martin, Councillor Murat. Councillor Martin. Councillor Murat. No. Any question? Any speaker against? I'll put that. Those in favour? Carried. And the last one on these items is 16.2, which is Sports Advisory Committee minutes. Councillor Witters, Councillor Martin, Councillor Witters.
Yeah, it's just a regular one, but also just down the bottom, if you have a look, there's a change to the structure of the Sports Council in regards to the membership, an increase from 10 members to 12 members in part 3 there, so just to let the rest of the councillors know that that's on there when they vote for it. Anyone wants clarification, I can give it to them. Can't name them off my head, but expressions of interest were put out for people within the sporting community to be involved, to increase the participation of the Sports Council, and we received 12 applications, so we decided to go with 12.
Councillor Martin. The speaker against? Okay, I'll put that. Those in favour? Carried. Councillors, just before we... Do you have that thing? Councillors, can I indulge, not myself, but item 17, which is matters of urgent nature, can I change that just generally to general business? I just want to raise one issue, and that's just to give you an update on the Tinga, please. Jess will send you an email with attachment with all the details about what's been happening, but if I can just read through a few things. This report provides an overview of the response efforts which started when Council, Armidale Ridge Council, was notified on February the 12th of a significant bushfire event around Tinga. With fire still burning, ARC crews established roadblocks and closed these roads to prevent attempted access by the general public. Following inspections and assessments, additional ARC crews were deployed the following day to clear burnt fallen trees that were preventing RFS crews assessing and fighting the still burning fire. Staff are also involved in driving water carts supporting the RFS directly and in helping with bring residents out of the fire zone to refuge in Guyra. Council staff have since been working closely with State Emergency Management staff together with Inverell Shire Council to establish and operate a recovery committee with 3 subcommittees: health and wellbeing, infrastructure, waste and environment, and animal and agriculture. These committees have been an important mechanism in engaging the Tingha community in recovery efforts facilitated by Council's Community Services team. 5 separate community meetings have been held since February, attended by a total of more than 300 people. On March the 20th, I attended a community meeting with Inverell Shire Council's Mayor and Deputy Mayor and Black Saturday disaster survivor Anne Leadbeater, OAM, who spoke about her experiences in the 2011 Victorian fires. While we're still working through key issues, including asbestos waste disposal, recovery efforts are well underway, and I am confident the Tingha people are getting the assistance they need through efforts by our council in collaboration with Inverell Shire Council and state government agencies. I would like to thank and acknowledge the support of State Emergency Management staff and our own council officers. They have provided support and assistance from the day the emergency was declared through to ongoing recovery efforts for those community members still deeply affected by the bushfire. So thank you. Councillor Gillespie.
When you're finished with that one, this is just something that's came up in the last week or so with me, and I think it is nearly in urgent sort of what's matter with the way the super school is going up there and the traffic change coming through the centre of town and the arterial sort of roads. Has anyone, do they realise the amount of traffic that's changed in Armidale on up your Marsh Street and up all that sort of stuff with all the traffic going north and then south, with the one major school going, and in the couple of years to come when the super school is done, there will be big issues with the vice versa. And I'm just curious if anyone's got any idea what's going on in relation to that, or does it come to anyone's mind? You know, it might be a good little topic just to have a talk about and get a bit ready for it if no one has.
Thank you, Councillor Gillespie. Could I ask Councillor Martin, who's on that committee, to take note of your comments and liaise directly with you, Councillor Gillespie, and on it in the future? Thank you. Okay. I will now ask for a move and a second that we go into closed session. Councillor Murat, Councillor Witters, and close the meeting as of 17:07. Thank you for attending.